Now, there's something that you should be aware of, and this regards geopolitics and history, and that is that empires learn no longer to be empires by losing wars. And this is true throughout history. And the other thing that is almost universally true is that when empires are in decline, they do that which only accelerates their demise rather than improves the situation. Most empires go out kicking and fighting. They don't go quietly. They're just not able to let go and accept that things do not last. And you might be asking, well, why are you going on about this? Why are you talking about politics again? This hasn't got to do with politics. This is about basic human nature and about how we do whatever we can to make things worse rather than improve the situation. What is taught in the Buddha Dharma is that an ordinary sentient being is one who seeks happiness and also to avoid suffering. But not understanding the causes of happiness and suffering, that individual applies themselves to the causes of suffering, thinking that that will bring about happiness. That's exactly what we do. And this is what nations do. For example, this is what Vladimir Putin is doing at this moment. About 30 years ago, then the Soviet Union collapsed economically. It had been in decline for quite a long time. And part of that which accelerated this decline was their engagement in hegemonistic wars, for example, their involvement in Afghanistan. That was disastrous, but they didn't learn from their failure. And as a consequence of this, or partially as a consequence of this, then there was economic collapse in the Soviet Union in the late 90s. But the Russians weren't able to accept this. They weren't able to accept being demoted in status in the world stage. And so, since then, they've been engaging in further conflict and wars, for example, Chechnya. And the first Chechen war went disastrously for the Russians. And it's only from Vladimir Putin's intense deceit that they eventually managed to install a puppet government in this southern state of Russia. Used to be part of the Soviet Union. Likewise, they engaged in conflict in Georgia and most recently in Ukraine. And this was all out of desperation to hold back the wheels of time on the natural progress. All empires disappear. The Roman Empire disappeared. In the end, all that's left is old buildings and artifacts left in museums. What happened to the Tang Dynasty? What happened to the Egyptian Empire? What happened to the Greeks? It's all the same. Why we cause ourselves so much trouble is because we don't understand impermanence. We don't accept it. And then we fight against it. In fact, we fight against nature in general, thinking that this will bring us greater profit. But all it does is exacerbate the situation, increase the suffering of ourselves and others. This is exactly what is happening in the United States of America at the moment. It's natural for empires to decline. And because of the phenomena of acceleration, for example, in the modern era, then empires rise more quickly and also fall more quickly. So now other countries are on the antecedents. In the West, our populations have been in decline for a long time. And lacking human resource, then there is no way for us to progress and increase in power and influence. We should accept this. But because of pride, perhaps fear, whatever it is, then we go down kicking and screaming. So currently what's happening in the United States of America is that they are unable to accept that they are falling from the premier position in world geopolitics. the largest populations in the world now have more resources, and their economies are potentially growing. And so in the future, there is no way for us to persist. But we have this idea that if we fight hard enough, we'll be able to overcome natural impermanence. Everything is impermanent. Even the sun in the sky will eventually cease to shine. The mountains will crumble to the sea. It's unavoidable. We have to accept that. Because we don't accept it, then we make our lives more difficult. Now, Donald Trump was elected on the platform of making America great again. And what he says he's doing is improving their status in the world, using leverage to return to the glory days of the past. If you think about when these days were, when this all happened, it was around the baby boom time, right? After World War II, American industry was premier amongst all the nations. It's partially because they didn't get involved in the war till very late, and they were making weapons for people. But everywhere else, for example, in Europe, was bombed to the Stone Age. And so they had an advantage. And through the 50s and 60s, then there was great wealth. So we hearken back to these ages and think, wow, things were so good then. If we only have their values and their ideas, then we can return to those glory days. This is so mistaken. The Romans were in shock when their empire collapsed, let's say. They thought that they had correctly propitiated the gods, that their system was infallible. They had fallen under the delusion that they would never decline. But it's not like that. What the Buddha taught is that the current wealth, resources, luxury that we experience is a consequence of previous actions. And once those seeds, those causes have been exhausted, for example, once our luxury and our well-being has ripened, and we've experienced that, then they will no longer return. Those same causes. They're exhausted, basically. And so what we need to do for future causes of happiness is in the present moment invest ourselves in virtuous acts. But what do we do instead? What do empires do instead? What is Putin doing? What is Donald Trump doing? They're investing themselves in negativity, non-virtue, discrimination, prejudice, physical violence, dropping bombs on people, for example. I mean, look at Israel, right? Look at Netanyahu's position at the moment. It's basically anybody who harms us will be annihilated. And he feels by doing this, by following this policy, that he will secure a better future for the nation of Israel. Well, what the Buddha taught is, if you engage in violence and harm, in the future, you will experience suffering. For some reason, we don't believe this. I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me that that is the case. That if you want to experience well-being, then you should apply yourself to virtuous acts. You should apply yourself to generosity, patience, these sorts of things. You should discipline yourself, avoid violence, etc., etc., etc. We have this idea that we can fight against nature, that we can overcome the results of our karma through violence. It's totally ignorant. I mean, sure, in the short term, if we kill our enemy, then we may get rid of them. But if we create a culture of violence and fear, then things never get better. Eventually, they always get worse. I mean, you just look at authoritarian governments. How long do they last? They're not long-lived. And they always end in disaster. But the idea is that we can just force through it. We have this kind of idea in general in the modern world. If we use force, that we can benefit in the long run. And doing this, then, we fight against nature. We fight against impermanence. It doesn't turn out well in the end. I am always surprised that no nation has ever figured this out. I mean, it happened to Imperial Japan. They had been engaging in war with China for many years. They had some success. But as their empire fell into decline, and they looked about them and they saw the potential future where Japan was no longer dominant in their sphere of influence, and then they had to make a decision, right? So they look around and think, well, we've got a really big army. What should we do? That's what nations do. That's what America's doing right now. That's what Putin is doing. Well, we've got a big army. If we risk it, and we blow these people up, we conquer this nation, steal their resources, then we can build ourselves back to where we were before. Do you recognize this way of thinking? It's exactly what Putin's doing, right? They had all this sort of old Soviet scrap metal, tanks and things in storage and jets. And they sort of thought like, well, if we invade Afghanistan or occupy Afghanistan, if we send some ships to Syria, if we interfere in the politics in Georgia and Chechnya, then we can return ourselves to our previous glory. That's the idea, right? So it's all this stuff that we built 20, 30, 50 years ago. Well, they tried it, right, on Ukraine. They moved in with hundreds and hundreds of tanks. There were convoys of vehicles 50 kilometers long. And what's happened? A war they thought would last 3 days or a week has been protracted. It's almost 4 years now. Millions wounded or dead. All that's happened is it created greater and greater suffering in the world. And it can't lead to anything positive. Even if it were the case that Putin succeeded in Ukraine and then turned his sights towards Europe, the eventual outcome could never be good. It never has been in the past. I mean, it's ignorant. It reminds me of Napoleon trying to invade Russia, or Hitler trying to invade Russia. I mean, it's not like they didn't study history. It's not like they didn't realize anybody in the past who's tried to do that has failed. For some reason, they thought they would succeed where others had failed. It's utter madness. But nations do it over and over again. The Japanese decided to invade Pearl Harbor. They didn't take that decision lightly. They were just going crazy. They calculated that it was risky, but if they brought America into the war, they may rebuild their empire. Of course it didn't work. I mean, Hitler had a run of luck, but in the end, he failed miserably. Not only did he fail miserably, but he had to take his own life to stop himself from being mutilated and hung from a lamppost, like his friend Mussolini, for example. But we never learn. We think we can overpower our enemies. We think we can conquer nature. We think we can hold back the wheels of time. And all we do is perpetuate our suffering. My advice is go quietly. Don't make things worse. Use your resources in other ways. I'm sure there have been some skillful politicians in the past, but they were diplomats. They weren't warriors. So now Netanyahu is dropping bombs on Qatar. There's few countries in his region that he hasn't dropped bombs on. America is turning its sights towards Venezuela. The question is, does oil have anything to do with it? I think so. Considering Venezuelan oil is perfect for American refineries. It was a similar thought that the Japanese had. They had to protect their resources. Empires burn fuel, consume human lives. But to my mind, this is a very old-fashioned way of thinking. Really pre-industrial era. This notion that you can either win or lose. That there's no win-win scenario. But there is a win-win scenario. In fact, it's been proven time and time again. All the statistics point to the fact that nations who engage in diplomacy, who use their soft power in non-hegemonistic ways, then increase their own wealth, but also increase the wealth of others. I mean, we had this previous idea, right? I think Darwin was largely responsible for this, that competition is what we need. We need to fight with each other. We need to compete with each other to succeed. But I don't believe it. It's cooperation that brings about wealth and happiness. We have this notion of survival of the fittest, right? That the tigers and the lions are principal among all the animals. But they're the ones who are closest to extinction. So it's animals who cooperate who are able to succeed. Recently, I saw some nature documentary on the dinosaurs. We used to have a very similar idea about them. But it seems now that what we understand is that the ones who survived, the ones who did the best, were more intelligent. They were able to cooperate in their tasks. And in the end, the ones that survived were the ones that were more adaptable. We need to be more adaptable. We need to accept things and adapt to situations. But coming back to the spiritual path and our own predicament, then there's almost nothing more important for you to do than to contemplate your own impermanence. The wealthy will become impoverished. The impoverished will become wealthy. Everything that is built up will collapse to the ground. Everything that is brought together will be separated. Everything that is increased will diminish. And everything that is living will die. Don't listen to the charlatans who are trying to sell you immortal life. This life is a one-way street. There is a progression, birth, aging, sickness, and death, and none of us can reverse this. You can preserve what you have earned through previous karma. And in order to do that, then don't waste your resources. Don't burn yourself up before your time. That's about all you can do. But you can't turn the tide of time. Far better if you learn to accept it. In many ways, then the spiritual path begins with this, with the contemplation on impermanence. And if you have an appreciation for the limited time you have in this life, then you will only want to invest yourself wisely. Invest your time and your energies in that which will be profitable in future times, in future lifetimes, if you believe in such a thing. Well, for me, and there have been many recent signs of the impermanence of things. As you may be aware, then just a few weeks ago, my mother passed away. I'd been here for 3 years looking after her, and it seemed like it would never end. But that's foolish for me to feel that way. Now, the landscape of my life has changed drastically. Several months ago, I was a monk, and now I'm a layperson. Everything is impermanent. Things change. We need to understand that. If you understand that things change, then you'll always be ready for new circumstances. But it's nothing to get depressed about, because change is also opportunity. Don't feel like you're stuck in the same life, in the same role, in the same narrative, and that there's no escape. This cripples many people in their lives. For example, relationships. Or in a job, a dead-end job. Once you are completely happy with the idea that things never remain the same, then also you are able better to adapt. And when potential opportunities arise, when normally because of your strong sense of permanence, you would reject those opportunities, you will be able to adapt. Well, these are just a few of my thoughts that I felt like sharing with you today. If they've been of some use to you, then please bear them in mind. And likewise, if you feel they are of no use, then discard them. I, for one, will continue to try my best to do something beneficial in this life. Because in my mind, then we are all in this together. We are all in the same boat. There is no us or them. We are confronted by the paradox of existence and afflicted by our negative emotions. And it is my belief, if we are able to overcome these negative tendencies, then our future and the future of those that we are connected with will improve. And because of this, then I'm willing to dedicate my time to sharing what little I've learned on the spiritual path with others. Because I believe that this path will lead to liberation. And it is my hope that you, at some point, should be able to overcome your negative tendencies and achieve liberation from suffering in the mundane world, and eventually the state of a fully enlightened being who works solely for the benefit of others. So until next time, and see you later.